I'm Haslinda Amina of Bloomberg Television. Thank you for joining us as we kick off our discussion on sustainable infrastructure toward a connected world. The world is bracing for a perfect long storm. We've seen a devastating pandemic, a war, multiple crises, energy, food, debt, climate, all highlighting just how crucial it is to have the infrastructure to support social and economic activity. Now, as we look ahead to tomorrow, it is all the more important that infrastructure we build today is better, smarter, more resilient, more efficient to help us contain the cost of future shocks. We're hoping today's session will shed light on how AIIB can better achieve its mandate as a multilateral development bank and how it can further meet client needs in the short term while positioning them for sustainable recovery and growth in the future. Our speakers will also help us explore ways on how we can reduce the burden of infrastructure spending as we grapple with a higher cost of borrowing. Now, before we get to our panel discussion, it is my privilege to first invite Jin-Li Chun, President and Chair of the Board of Directors of the AIIB, to give us the opening speech. President Jin, good to see you again.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of this flagship webinar, Sustainable Infrastructure Toward a Connected World, touches the very heart of not just the AIIB's mandate. This is also what concerns other multilateral development banks and the global community more generally. How can we better address the multiple crises and long-term challenges we currently face? Without repeating the details that we all know very well, the world has faced unprecedented pressures over the last 3 years. While some are short-term and cyclical, others, like climate change, are major systemic threats which have long-term implications for the human society. The scale and the complexity of these challenges and their impacts mean they cannot be solved in isolation. An integrated approach to addressing them is crucial. The need for cooperation and multilateral action to address common threats is greater than ever. With the multiple layered crises of the last few years, our bank has been focused on meeting the urgent needs of our members. Our bank has created new innovations, such as the COVID-19 Crisis Recovery Facility. We have also responded rapidly to assist the members hit hard by the pandemic and global economic pressures to alleviate their macroeconomic distress. This includes a new proposal to establish a standing mechanism for emergency response, which will soon be submitted to the board for approval. However, throughout these crises, we have remained laser-focused on our core mission, which is financing infrastructure for tomorrow. The essence of our corporate strategy is enabling sustainable growth and supporting humanity's moonshot transition toward net zero. To achieve our strategy, we are prioritizing finance for green infrastructure, technology adoption, and regional connectivity. In today's environment, we believe the concept of infrastructure should be expanded to address the global issues of the 21st century. Over the last 3 years, different types of essential systems and infrastructure has shown themselves as critical for continued social and economic development in times of turmoil. Responsive healthcare systems, cold storage and logistics for efficient vaccine deployment, digital infrastructure for continued economic development, resilient clean energy systems that mitigate climate change and ensure affordable energy access. In today's world, these are all integral components of basic infrastructure in the modern sense of the term. Recent times have also laid bare worrisome infrastructure fragility. Climate-induced disasters, financial vulnerability from demand shocks, operational risks from constrained maintenance expenditure. These are just a few of the recent challenges that have forced us to rethink how infrastructure can be better built to be smarter, more resilient, more cost-effective, and efficient. We must be more creative to develop infrastructure that is environmentally, socially, economically sustainable over the long term. To stay relevant, we should also rethink how the international community and NDBs can better respond to the diverse needs of clients. In particular, we should question how best to finance infrastructure. In the current environment, many low-income countries find themselves more constrained in their financial ability to finance ambitious national infrastructure programs. We have to ask whether the traditional project finance approach is still the most effective method. To this end, our bank is exploring innovative financing and lending modalities in an effort to help our members address their public financing constraints. In this regard, the private sector must play its part. Mobilizing private sector expertise and capital is a core objective set for our bank. Private sector investors will be attracted to invest in emerging market infrastructure when this is seen as an attractive asset class. We are confident the social and economic dynamics of the Asian region will remain robust, and there are interesting stories to tell about investment and fruition. Innovative initiatives such as infrastructure collateralized loan obligations or green bonds can create benchmarks that we hope will mobilize private capital. These are some of the fundamental issues that the panel will address, and I look forward to their views as practical guidance for our bank. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to express my thanks for your participation at the annual meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and today's flagship webinar. These are crucial issues which affect all of us, and I very much welcome your active involvement. Thank you very much.
President Jin Li-kun, thank you so much for that. I know you highlighted several issues and challenges. Let's get to our panel discussion. Our topic today, again, sustainable infrastructure toward a connected world. I'd like to introduce our distinguished speakers. Wang Dongwei, Vice Minister of Finance of China. Vice Minister Wang has a doctorate in economics. He has held multiple positions, including Minister of United Front Work Department and Deputy Secretary of the Provincial Political Consultative Conference Party Group. Also, Danny Alexander, Vice President of Policy and Strategy of the AIIB. Danny oversees the bank's environmental and social policies and their implementation. Prior to joining the bank, Danny was Chief Secretary to the Treasury of the United Kingdom. Rachel Kite, Dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Dean Kite is the first woman to hold the position. Prior to joining Fletcher, Dean Kite was the special representative of the UN Secretary General and CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. She was also co-chair of UN Energy. And finally, Dr. Donald Kobaruka, Chairman and Managing Partner of Southbridge. Dr. Kobaruka is a former Finance Minister of Rwanda and the 7th President of the African Development Bank. He's credited for the reach and impact of the African Development Bank. Thank you to our speakers. Definitely a distinguished panel. First off, to start, I'd like to invite each speaker to give an overview, initial thoughts, if you will, on how infrastructure should respond to the needs of tomorrow, how perhaps the pandemic and ensuing challenges are shaping how we approach infrastructure that's economically viable, environmentally sound, and climate resilient. Vice Minister Wang, if you could kick it off, sir.
President Jin Li-kun, dear guests, good evening. It gives me great pleasure to attend this webinar with the theme of sustainable infrastructure toward a connected world. This webinar is of great importance when the global recovery is in a lack of momentum and the infrastructure investment is insufficient. And I think this webinar is very important and targeted. And just now, the speech made by President Jin Li-kun provided us with great insights We know that infrastructure is a major support for social and economic development. The Chinese government attaches great importance to infrastructure development. Since 2012, the Chinese government has actively promoted high-quality infrastructure development, with historic achievements made in the transportation, energy, water conservation, and new type infrastructure sectors. We keep improving the infrastructure network, improved the quality and capacity of service, enhanced the innovation-driving capacity, accelerated the coordinated and integrated development, speed up the development of a modern governance system, and thus effectively supported social and economic development. During this process, we have made positive progress in innovating the infrastructure investment and financing mechanism. We increased the fiscal expenditure, give full play to policy-based development financing tools, regulated the development of PPP models, and deepened the reform of asset capitalization, stockization, and securitization. We made breakthroughs in real estate investment trust pilot programs in the infrastructure sector and improved an infrastructure investment system with multiple channels. I myself have been engaged in fiscal work for many years. I have worked in CMOF and for over 20 years. And I've also served as Director Generals of a provincial fiscal department and as Chief Supervisor of Provincial Fiscal Supervision Office. And I have also worked in the CPC departments and governments in municipalities. And I have gained experience in how governments support infrastructure development. And I'm very pleased to take this opportunity to share with our guests my vision. Thank you.
Vice Minister Wang, just to follow up, these are challenging times, times of crisis. How do you maintain spending in development and maintenance of infrastructure under such circumstances?
Thank you. I think it's quite a good question. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts based on my experience. As we know, faced with the tough domestic and international economic situation, the Chinese government fully gives play to infrastructure investment in stabilizing the microeconomy and supporting economic development. And we strike a balance between stabilizing growth and adjusting our structure. We attach equal importance to economic and social benefits and improve the whole cycle effects of infrastructure. We give full play to the leveraging role of infrastructure investment to provide strong momentum for economic growth. And I have several thoughts to share. The first is to integrate all kinds of resources to develop a diversified investment and financing system. The Chinese government fully utilizes government investment to drive infrastructure investment and has formulated a series of policies to expand investment channels for financial institutions, enterprises, and other market entities in the infrastructure sector. In terms of government investment, since 2013, the Central Finance Authority has earmarked 4.8 trillion yuan of investment in the budget to support key projects in major sectors, which provided a stable source of funds for stabilizing investment. At the same time, especially in recent years, the Chinese government uses special local bonds as a key tool and promotes the safe, regulated, and efficient use of special bonds to support major national strategies and key projects. From 2015 to 2022, China issued 15.85 trillion yuan of special local bonds. And in terms of financial credit policies, since June this year, the Chinese government has raised the credit line of policy banks and supported relevant financial institutions to create policy-based or development-oriented tools to increase the financial support to infrastructure development. In terms of attracting private investment, China promotes and uses the PPP model in a regulated and orderly manner to develop a unified, open, and transparent development environment, actively guide all kinds of market players to participate in infrastructure investment, development, and operation, fill the gap of infrastructure and public service, and improve the quality and efficiency of public service supply. By August this year, the project library of the National PPP Integrated Information Platform has contained over 100,000 projects with a total investment of 16.5 trillion yuan. Besides, the Chinese government has also promulgated a series of measures to revitalize the remnant assets and attract private investment through asset securitization and real estate investment trusts. And the second thing I'd like to share is that we follow the people-centered development philosophy and enable infrastructure to meet people's growing needs for a better life. In the whole process of infrastructure planning, design, construction, and operation, the Chinese government stresses people's needs and appeals. From the urban to the rural areas, from the water, power, and transportation sectors to the education, healthcare, and elderly care sectors, we enable our people to benefit from the comprehensive development of infrastructure. I give one example here. Since 2012, China has invested over 460 billion yuan in rural water supply projects, which provided safe drinking water for 280 million rural residents. We improved the level of water supply for 360 million rural population and made great contribution to the victory against poverty and the building of a moderately prosperous society. This is an unprecedented historic achievement. And now, the herdsmen in border areas and the villagers in mountainous areas have access to high-quality tap water, and they have shaken off the fate of carrying water by manual as their ancestors did. And now they have access to very good tap water. And the third is to follow the principle of moderately advanced development and strengthen the strategic and forward-looking planning of the new type infrastructure system. We know that every round of technological revolution breeds new infrastructure development, and every round of infrastructure development drives new economic transformation and upgrading. In the past decade, the Chinese government focused on future development, stuck to moderately advanced development, and accelerate the planning of new type infrastructure development to enable social and economic development. First, IT infrastructure upgraded at a faster pace. Over the past decade, China's total optical fiber length grew by 2.7 times. Telecommunication entered the 5G era with 5G signals covering every country and internet access realized in every village. We have also accelerated the application of the next generation of internet technology, and our internet size at technology application level leads the world. Second, the integrated infrastructure landscape is taking shape. Smart devices are entering all walks of life. We are accelerating the three-dimensional smart transportation system. New types of transportation, such as unmanned piers and autopilot, keep emerging. 90% of our airports have realized paperless operation. And welfare facilities, such as e-commerce, remote medical service, and online education are developing faster, which breathes new life into social and economic development and livelihood improvement. Third, we are accelerating the improvement of innovative infrastructure. We plan to build 77 national-level case scientific infrastructure programs, 200 national-level engineering research centers, 1,600 national enterprise technology centers, and a batch of national-level industrial innovation centers to improve the scientific infrastructure system. At the same time, the Chinese government works within our capabilities and controls the degree of moderately advanced development. We take comprehensive consideration of the government's fiscal power, debt risks, and infrastructure needs, make scientific plans, steadily promote the work, pay attention to the program's effects, enhance the financial and performance management of infrastructure programs, prevent and resolve the local hidden debt risks, and strike a balance between development promotion and risk control. And the fourth experience is to enhance support and establish a coordination mechanism for key infrastructure development. Infrastructure development features a wide range, huge investment, and a long cycle. It usually involves many areas and entities, and requires cross-region and cross-sector coordination. It is also usually restricted by factors or policies. Therefore, the Chinese government keeps improving the infrastructure planning system based on our national development plans. We optimize the layout, structure, functions, and development models of infrastructure, strengthen project reserves, accelerate the early stage research and preparation of infrastructure programs, and actively guide public resource allocation to improve the efficiency of the programs. During the implementation of the plans, we keep enhancing support for infrastructure development, establish coordination mechanisms to strengthen cross-region, cross-department, and cross-sector coordination and interaction, settle major issues we encounter during the programs, and keep improving the support from all resource factors so as to support major infrastructure project investment and construction. At the same time, we think that the cooperation with bilateral and multilateral development institutions is of great significance for infrastructure development. Taking China as an example, by the end of 2021, the Chinese government has utilized over $180 billion of credit commitment from international financial institutions and foreign governments, which provided China with the necessary funds, technology, and advanced ideas and experience, and supported China's high-quality infrastructure development. And in the future, China is willing to work with bilateral and multilateral development institutions, including the AIIB, to promote China's high-quality development and discuss the possibility of tripartite cooperation with relevant countries, and provide more funds and intellectual support to developing countries' infrastructure development. Thank you.
Vice Minister Wong, we thank you for your insights. Now I'd like to invite Danny to give his overview from the AIIB's perspective. Danny.
Thank you very much, Haslinda, and it's a great pleasure to be here as part of this this panel today. And so, as you said at the start, and as President Jin emphasized in his remarks, these are extraordinary times we're living in, with both shorter term, we hope, crises affecting many countries, both the legacy of COVID-19, the impacts of the war in Ukraine, high inflation and financial policy changes having an effect all around the world, and at the same time, the really existential crisis potentially of climate change. And the consequences are that governments have fewer resources at their disposal. There are also challenges for private sector investments. And so how we maintain the focus of investment in sustainable infrastructure towards a connected world, as is the title of this event, is really a critical question, let alone how we mobilize for what President Jin rightly called the moonshot for net zero. And, you know, we're having this meeting just a few days ahead of the countries of the world gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the COP27 meeting, which is, I think, a very good opportunity for the world collectively to, as it were, hold its feet to the fire on the implementation of the many commitments that were made at COP26 in Glasgow last year. You know, this decade, the 2020s, is really the critical decade in terms of action on climate. We know that if the action is not taken, and that really means mobilizing investment at the scale that is needed to enable the climate transition around the world, then the goals of the Paris Agreement to keep global temperature rises below 2 degrees and ideally to the 1.5 degrees that was much of the focus of discussion in Glasgow last year, we know that will be out of reach. And so these years, whilst also being riddled with crises and the huge challenges that presents for governments and countries and for people all over the world, these years also need to be the time in which we're really mobilizing investment that is sustainable for the climate transition. For AIIB, we aim to invest our resources the $100 billion of capital that our members have endowed us with in what we call infrastructure for tomorrow. And that means thinking about what is the kind of infrastructure that our members are going to need for the next few decades of their development. And that means green infrastructure, and especially climate-focused infrastructure. So we want to invest at least half of our financing in climate finance from 2025 onwards, and we're building well, I think, towards that goal. We want to invest in cross-border connectivity and regional cooperation, digital connectivity, digital infrastructure, and applying technology to infrastructure challenges and infrastructure projects is a critical part also of the value that AIIB seeks to add to the projects that we finance. And Vice Minister Wang also emphasized technology as part of his presentation, and rightly so. And it's an area of China's development experience, which I think is of great interest to many other countries around the world. But then, of course, the scale of resources available to multilateral development banks like the AIIB is quite small compared to the scale of the challenges. And so that means that we have to support the private sector. It means we have to invest in private sector projects, and more importantly, also support the mobilization of other capital towards these infrastructure challenges. So AIIB aims that by 2030, at least 50% of our financing will be for private sector, non-sovereign projects, and that we will use that investment to crowd in and to mobilize significant additional private sector finance. And so I think the challenge now, and especially at a time when geopolitical strains also make cooperation harder, is for international institutions like multilateral development banks, like the AIIB, like the World Bank, like the ADB, and others, to work together in partnership. I think partnership is a critical part of achieving these goals. And those partnerships should go beyond MDBs to involve the private sector, to involve philanthropic resources, much of which is now being devoted to the climate challenge. And it means that we have to work closely with our clients. We have to support our clients to make the investments that they need to help to meet these challenges. So AIIB very much aims to be a client-focused institution, to engage closely with our clients, to listen to their objectives and to support them through financing. And I think together, this approach will help to meet these global challenges. But without the broader partnerships, without the working together, it will be impossible to meet those goals for any one institution, be it public sector or private sector. Thank you.
It always comes down to financing, Danny. I mean, when you talk about the role of MDBs, AIIB in particular, how do you increase the availability of financing for these sustainable infrastructure more efficient, more effective?
Well, you're absolutely right. As I said, for MDBs, one of our core missions is mobilizing finance, whether it's deploying our own resources or mobilizing other funds. And I think MDBs should focus on maximizing the mobilization value of every action we take and of every dollar that we invest. Of course, we also have to pay close attention to the quality of that investment, and that is another function I think that international institutions can play. We can think about mobilization in two ways. One is for individual projects, and the other is broader mobilization. So we see a role for AIIB also in mobilizing finance generally into Asian and emerging market infrastructure. And President Jin referred to this in his remarks. We've been working to create structures which can mobilize long-term institutional capital, such as the Asian Infrastructure Collateralized Loan Obligation through our partnership with Bayfront in Singapore, which is a unique project in Asia, which is seeking to support the emergence of infrastructure as an investable asset class, which in turn will help to mobilize pools of finance that find infrastructure too risky, but through these kind of instruments can be attracted, especially as they become more standardized. We've also supported the propagation of green bonds for infrastructure. We have an Asia climate bond portfolio project together with Amundi, which is also about expanding the range of high quality information about the climate performance of institutions as a whole, so that again investors have better structure to invest through. But also we have a critical role to increase the availability of funding at a project by project basis, at the asset level, if you like. And so, of course, first and foremost, we have to make sure that we don't crowd out financing. If the private sector can finance a project completely well by itself, there's no role for us. But also, we need to add value. Our focus on sustainability and our policies, particularly on ESG, need to be translated into every project. And this in itself is something which is also, I think, important and increasingly attractive and necessary for private investors also to focus on. So by being involved, AIIB can help to attract those kind of investors to projects. I think also, as you look at the world today, as has been said by several speakers, the availability of public resources is much more limited, and that means also supporting governments to develop mechanisms of their own to mobilize private capital, and to support that also through our investments. So there's a wide range of tools are needed, and a wide range of collaborations that are needed to mobilize the resources that are necessary at scale. AIIB is very committed to playing its part and to innovating and being creative in order to find the right ways to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you for the bank's perspective. Dean Kite, if I could invite you to give your overview.
Thank you very much. It's a real honour and privilege to be here today on such an important subject. And as both of the previous speakers and the President outlined, this is an extraordinary moment of potential leverage for AIIB with strong policy ambition at a moment where we really are at a fork in the road. We have a very clear, I think, diagnosis of what is needed in terms of sustainable infrastructure investment over the next decade. The question really is, are we able to mobilize the finance to be able to deliver on the pathway? And at the very heart of that is multilateral, I think, development banks in general, but at the very heart of this is AIIB, because of the potential that it has through this new commitment to strategic partnerships to really leverage its capital in an interesting way. So what do I mean? Well, as Danny just said, we're a week away from everybody flying to Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27, and it's a week where the UN and the International Energy Agency and other august bodies come out with a warning almost every day this week about exactly how dangerous our current position is as we fail to organize ourselves really towards net zero quickly enough. And so today the World Energy Outlook was published, and it paints a picture of some hope that despite the geopolitical situation that has been outlined by many speakers yesterday and at the top of this meeting, there is a possibility for a reset, because it's very clear that in large part also because of the global implications of the war in Ukraine, the energy security, planetary security, and human security goals that we all share can be achieved by a substantial ramp up in renewable energy and by really doubling down on energy efficiency. Now, many countries have started to do this already, and those countries are weathering this particular perfect storm better than others. But the scale of the ramp up is really quite significant. The IEA has just sort of illustrated that by talking about the amount of investment needed in renewable energy in order to get to the scenarios that they lay out. So today we have an investment of about $1.3 trillion. In order to get to where we need to be by 2030, this has to sort of come up to $2 trillion a year. But really, to get to net zero, we need to be more in line with $4 trillion of investment in renewable energy a year. Now, how do we move up that kind of curve? That's really the question in front of us now. But it's also, I think, alarming because we see that there is increased investment in renewable energy, but not large enough over the investment in the fossil fuel economy. Obviously, the fossil fuel economy is, as part of the transition, will remain, though it will diminish quite quickly. So for every dollar that we invest in fossil fuels today, we're investing 1.5 in renewable energy. That ratio has to change. And for every dollar we invest in fossil fuels has to be then met by $5 in renewable energy. So we're going to have to sort of stretch out the financing system. But the biggest problem we have, and this is where AIIB becomes so important, is that the cost of capital for renewable energy in low-income countries and emerging markets, so in developing countries and emerging markets, is 2 to 3 times higher than the cost of capital for renewable energy in advanced economies. And that gap has to be solved by the effective use of multilateral development banks and their ability to crowd in private finance and to bring private and public finance to play in these markets, and quickly, because these are the countries obviously that are suffering at the wrong end of the energy price spike crisis we have. These are the countries suffering from Europe's hoovering up of natural gas in markets, which has sent gas prices even higher. And these are the countries that are suffering from an underinvestment in infrastructure financing over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So they are in a very immediate perfect storm. So then it comes back to the strategies that AIIB has put in place. The strategic partnerships become incredibly important, also underlining the point made by other speakers that the answer here to the cheapest, dispatchable, most reliable renewable energy often will be in regional projects. Now, of course, China and others have lots of experience in this, and bringing that technical capacity, the institutional capacity, the institutions that countries will need, and the financing for regional projects demands strategic partnership. This is not a new point. It was made very clearly by the T20 in 2020 and other advisors since then. So really, I see AIIB in a position where it can leverage partnerships as well as leverage finance. And then, of course, the last point is continuing to find creative ways to open up private finance. And Danny mentioned many of these. And I think the trick here is from going from innovation to scale. So once something works, how do we do many of them? So Amundi did a very important transaction with IFC. It's working with AIIB, but how do we make these kinds of transactions really stretch across the emerging markets much, much further? And then finally, I think there'll be enormous focus in Sharm el-Sheikh on other possible ways of leveraging finance into, in particular, Africa. And obviously, Donald will talk more about that. But there's a lot of attention on the voluntary carbon markets and on carbon markets. And so obviously, we need much more of the global economy to be covered by effective carbon pricing. We should see many more attempts at regulated carbon markets. This is not the only thing to do, but an essential component part of pricing correctly pollution. And what we see is enormous interest in the voluntary carbon markets. But at the moment, we see a lot of supply, many, many voluntary credits being generated, but really, really soft demand. And that's because many corporates and many who may want to come into the voluntary carbon market space are reluctant and slightly nervous, while the sort of rules of the road and the sort of codes of conduct for how to participate in the voluntary carbon markets, how to show integrity in a science-based pathway towards net zero, who will judge that? How will that appear? When will that get regulated? So this uncertainty, I think, is a stifling demand. That is something that multilateral development banks, together with governments and other bodies, including the UN, really need to do a lot to support in the year ahead. Thank you.
Dean Kai, to your point, infrastructure needs to better meet the challenges of climate imperative, but we have an economic uncertainty right now. I mean, how do you maintain that focus on investing in low carbon infrastructure?
Well, I think this is actually where the World Energy Outlook report, which I think was released literally sort of an hour ago, is very clear that there's a short-term supply shock which has sent prices soaring, but that's not because of net zero commitments, and it's not because of the shift towards renewable energy. That is because of the supply shock on the fossil fuel side. So obviously, the countries that have invested more in their renewable energy stock, the countries that have invested more in smart grids and their ability to use digital management of demand, are actually weathering this storm a little better. Now, those are mainly countries in mainly advanced economies, but the lessons are there to be learnt, which is that your energy security will come from a robust approach to renewable energy and from an energy mix managed by a smart grid. So for those countries that have significant energy access gaps still, depending on their energy endowment, then it's the efficient use of the fossil fuels that they already have. It is the smartening of the grid, and then it's a doubling down to achieve the exponential rates of renewable energy that will put those countries in the strongest competitive positions. And the responsibility and the onus lies with advanced economies to make sure that the financing is available for those countries. There's no point in standing saying, well, you all need to go renewable if the financing is not there. And I think this is the political, but also the technical, because blending that finance, leveraging that finance at scale is something that we've failed to be able to do on a sustained basis for the last 2 decades. This is this particular moment, and it is a moment where I think there's extraordinary opportunity for visionary leadership, as the kind of visionary leadership we see at AIIB today.
Therein lies the key issue. Dean Kite, thank you so much for that. I'd like to invite Dr. Kaberuka for his take on today's topic, sustainable infrastructure towards a connected world. Dr. Kaberuka?
I can't hear you.
Dr. Kaberuka, could I invite you to give your overview?
Yeah. I cannot hear you, moderator.
While we get...
moderator, I cannot hear you at all.
Dr. Ruka. While we await to settle the issue with Dr. Kaberuka, Danny, perhaps I can ask you this question. It's been especially challenging for emerging and developing economies. Dean Kite alluded to this as well. Give us a sense of how the bank's initiatives have helped its least developed members. What else can be expected in the coming months and years ahead?
For many developing countries, this is a kind of perfect storm. The challenges in relation to food, to fuel, inflation, the financial shifts that are going on, and of course climate. We've seen, for example, in Pakistan, the heartrending images of the consequences of the flooding there. So when the COVID crisis broke out, AIIB established a COVID-19 crisis recovery facility. We set aside initially $13 billion, now $20 billion for crisis-related finance to our members, both to deal with immediate issues and also to help the recovery. And we've extended the scope of that to enable it to support members facing the consequences of this kind of poly-crisis, if you like. And so that's involved both budget support or policy-based financing, co-finance with our partners in the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. It's involved specifically targeted finance for members who are in particular need, and also finance targeted at supporting the economic recovery. And I think through that instrument, we've contributed to the coordinated global response to these very, very difficult situations. And we're now in discussions with our board about establishing a standing mechanism for emergency response, so that in future we can, when crises emerge, and although we hope there will be no more crises, we of course understand that in the world we are in today, sadly, those crises will emerge year by year in the future. That mechanism would give us the capacity to respond even more quickly when such issues emerge. But I think one of the critical issues also is to make sure that our finances is also being used to help recovery and to help build sustainability and build resilience through that recovery process. So, I'd highlight one example, which is in China. There was last year dreadful flooding in Henan province. Again, a climate-related natural disaster. We made a financing commitment of $1 billion to that area to help their reconstruction. And part of the added value was precisely building in climate change adaptation and resilience to the infrastructure that was being reconstructed. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I believe we've erased all the gremlins. Dr. Kabaruka, if we could get your take on the topic today.
Thank you. I apologize. I think the system cut out briefly. Can you hear me now, I hope?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Kabaruka.
Okay, I want to begin by greeting the leadership of the AIIB and thanking for invitation. Very good to see many colleagues and friends here. And to congratulate the AIIB, the newest IFI, which is playing a major role globally. And I'm particularly happy to see that 16 African countries have now joined the dance. I think President Jin and Minister Wang Dongwei have laid out issues accurately. So I want to limit my remarks just to three perspectives. Number one, what are the big mega trends which will drive the future economic path? Number two, what are the challenges for the international financial institutions, both old and new, in response to these trends? And C, how to balance long-term structural issues while being ready to act counter-cyclically and responding to shocks. So on the first point, the world over, we'll be facing basically 5 big trends. Number one is the demographic transitions. These are very familiar issues. Number two will be urbanization. There will be more people living in cities than the rural areas all across the world. Number three will be climate change. Number four will be digitalization. And number 5 will be how to manage the advantages of globalization, share the advantages, while managing the pains of globalization. So all these 5 trends have implications for the type of infrastructure we build, type of cities, managing digital, being inclusive, etc. Just think of climate change and energy transition alone. At a time of energy insecurity in the global north, at least Europe, and the energy poverty in the global south with 600 million people without power, right? And that brings us one to think of the challenges during the first industrial revolution. And now our President Jin is a very avid reader of the classics. You remember all these issues which happened during the first industrial revolution, cleaning cities, dealing with diseases caused by urbanization, energy, managing wastes, challenges of transport and communication during the first phase of globalization. I think there are many lessons to be learned from that. But in that context, what do the international financial institutions, all the new face? They face the following. Traditionally, they've been used to dealing with national issues, but increasingly they'll be called upon to deal with global public goods. And these global public goods would be either from climate, pandemics, migration, oceans, water, and the rest of it. So how to get a bank like AIIB, like its sister organizations, to focus at once at national issues, but also at the global public goods? That's issue number one. Issue number two is that I think Danny Alexander mentioned this. Even if we quadrupled now the capital of all these IFIs, including AIIB, it will be a small portion of capital we need, the scale we need, but also a small proportion of what is available in the private markets. So the challenge then for AIIB and other institutions is how do you actually use all the instruments and capabilities to crowd in, to de-risk the private capital for the kind of infrastructure we want to build? The second problem, which these institutions will face, will be the fact that traditionally, many of the shocks they deal with were internally generated. But increasingly, they'll be dealing with a lot of shocks which are externally generated, whether they are pandemics, financial, climate, or otherwise. And that balance is a challenge for the MDBs. And finally, I think it was the one colleague who mentioned it, we're entering a world where concessional finance is reaching a plateau. I hope I'm wrong, but if you look at the trends in many G7 countries, concessional finance is reaching a plateau. And therefore, we'll have to think about how to best deploy this very scarce resource, which is concessional finance. And you have to do to bear in mind that a lot of infrastructure we're doing now, and rightly so, is debt creating. Whether it is airports, ports, energy, digital, this is inevitable. But we need to make it sustainable by preventing currency mismatches, by preventing mismatch between long-term liabilities and the long-term assets. And that is an issue why the MDBs have to think very hard. And very finally, I know time is limited, I happen to be chair of the Global Fund for AIDS, Malaria, and Tuberculosis, which is an old pandemic which has not gone away. And the new pandemics come simply to add to the burden of many of the economies in the emerging markets and the global south. I've seen how it is challenging to raise concessional finance, even for those kind of pandemics. Yet, we shall be facing many pathogens in the future. And we need to build resilient health systems for that. Again, a bank like AIIB, which has done a lot during this crisis, would be called upon to respond. Now, I'm not suggesting that IFIs like AIIB will be directly involved in this, but there are aspects of it which are extremely important for them. And I'll pick just one, and I'll end at that point. And that is the crisis we saw in the global supply chains during crisis, for diagnostics, for therapeutics, for vaccines. And as a result, many countries now no longer feeling very secure and safe with the global supply chains, feel they should manufacture as much as possible a lot of these things. Now, the economics might be quite difficult to balance, but I think people will be balancing both security, reliability, and the economic efficiency. I hope and expect that banks like AIIB will help countries do it right, i.e. manufacture therapeutics, diagnostics, vaccines, everything we need for meeting challenge of pandemics or climate change, whatever it is, but doing it in an efficient way. In my view, this is quite a big agenda for your bank, but I think the AIIB, in its short term of existence, is very well placed to play this role. And I hope it does so with all our support, especially in the global south. Thank you.
Dr. Kaberuka, just to follow up, do you think the way infrastructure is being financed today is enough to withstand protected or multiple natural crises?
So let me pick one. Let me just pick one. You know, a long time ago, a minister in the British government told me that during the first industrial revolution in the UK, what actually contributed to improving health outcomes was not investing in health as such. It was investing in infrastructure, cleaning up the cities, providing homes, providing transport, water, etc. I think we're facing nearly the same, not a similar problem. We need to figure out how to have infrastructure which is adjusted to the challenges I mentioned: demographic dynamics, demographic transition, urbanization, climate change, and of course, managing globalization. Now, are we doing so rightly? I would not say so, but I think all of us have learned lessons that in the current challenges we face, we'll have to balance the needs, the economics, at the same time, the short-term issues, long-term issues. How do you do so without creating a lot of debt burdens which are unbearable? How do you so being inclusive? To give you an example, in one of Africa's largest cities, you have got probably 500,000 people who live in slums. Slums meaning unplanned cities, no facilities. 500,000 people. And that is the problem of inclusive urbanization, which will require different type of infrastructure. Added to that, 600 million people without energy. That is inclusive infrastructure we need, and technology now provides us opportunities to do that. I could say the same for digitalization. It's at once a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I do hope that, at least for Africa, in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we can work with the AIIB and other institutions to manage these challenges which I'm mentioning.
Dr. Kaberuka, thank you so much for that. I'd like to open the discussion to all participants. We'll like to take questions from the participants. And we have one question here from Georgia. To what extent does the standardization of legal and regulatory environment, to what extent is it important for achieving better infrastructure towards a connected world? So the question is really on legal and regulatory environment. To what extent is standardization important to achieve better infrastructure? Perhaps Dean Kite, you can take that question.
Well, it's an excellent question, and it goes to the question of scale. So obviously there is significant, progress to be made in the regulatory environment, country by country. But then obviously Georgia, placed where it is, has got experience of multi-country infrastructure projects, Baku Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline and others. And so aligning the regulatory approaches across regions becomes very important in all forms of infrastructure. And the regulatory approach can obviously the definitions of, for example, as we now approach a new era of green hydrogen, is every jurisdiction going to consider green hydrogen in the same way, so that support and subsidies and incentives can be treated in the same way across different countries. Access to international support can be accessed in the same way. But then it goes all the way down to treatment of how power purchase agreements are manufactured, how bidding rooms are managed, all the way down into the nitty-gritty of private sector funded infrastructure. So I think this is really important. And what I see is a huge deficit actually globally in the kinds of technical advice and support that countries can get, but also that companies can get, so that they can manage this new world of ESG, this new world of different forms of financing, this new world of new financial products for infrastructure as well. So I think it's a critically important issue. Regional projects are going to be the way that we dispatch, as I said, renewable energy in the cheapest way to the most people. And so this is something that I think MDBs have a lot of experience with. Also national development banks, national green banks. I think these can be incredibly important instruments, but also important partners for AIIB. So I think it's a very important question, and an area where there's going to have to be a significant sort of ramping up of available good quality advice at a reasonable price to countries that need it.
Danny, your thoughts on it? AIIB, if I got it right, approved about 191 projects in 33 member countries. How are you looking at it?
You've got it exactly right. Very good. Thank you. So, look, I mean, I guess I'd make a couple of observations. The first is to say that, of course, having good quality legal and regulatory environments at a country level is an important tool to attract investors, irrespective of the degree of standardization. But standardization plays a role or can play a role in a number of areas. So one of AIIB's focus is on cross-border connectivity. And clearly, if you want to have cross-border projects, then having agreements about the standards and frameworks that apply to those projects is critical to make the most of the infrastructure that you're investing in. That can be legal, regulatory, customs, taxation. Those kind of things make a big difference. And the second is that standardization does facilitate investment, particularly in a connected world where capital knows few borders. And I talked earlier about one of the investments we've made in Bayfront, which is about helping to develop infrastructure as an investable asset class. one of the challenges for investors is that each infrastructure project is bespoke and different to a certain extent. And so greater standardization helps to ensure that projects can be combined and then invested in as an asset class by investors. And then in turn will help to mobilize much more capital for the kinds of infrastructure that we're talking about in this in this session. And then also, and this is a major focus for AIIB and for other multilateral development banks in our work, also having projects that are implemented to high standards, that are financially and economically sustainable, that have strong environmental and social protections built in, is a critical part of the kind of quality, developing the quality projects that we want to focus on. And so, when AIIB invests, these kind of policies have to be followed in all those projects. That, of course, creates a degree of standardization. And I think the more that we can play a role in propagating those standards, in sharing them and helping to bring them to new partners, the better it will be for the investment climate in many, many countries around the world. Thank you.
Danny, thank you for that. And we're quickly running out of time. It has been an insightful discussion. I'd like to thank our distinguished speakers. Wang Dongwei, Vice Minister of Finance of China, Danny Alexander, Vice President of Policy and Strategy of the AIIB, Dean Rachel Kite, Dean of the Fletcher School of Tufts University, and Dr. Donald Kabaruka, Chairman and Managing Partner of Southbridge. I thank you so much for your insights today, and I thank you, our participants, for joining us.